Ladies and gentlemen, I'm on the banks today of the lovely Holly Farm fishery in South Leicestershire, and I'm here today to give you my 5 cold water method feeder tips. Now when it comes to bait choice, I think you've got 2 options, ground bait and micro pellets. For me, once the water goes clear and cold, I like to use a nice fine dark ground bait. This is swim stim black with a little bit of swim stim reloaded added. Importantly, it's really dark and it's really fine. I've actually riddled this for a really fine riddle. It's not a riddle, it's like a colander from IKEA. If you ever get dragged around IKEA, have a look in the kitchen section, there's a colander there and it works perfectly for riddling ground bait. Now the fine texture of this ground bait for me, it serves 2 purposes. One, it goes around the feeder perfectly and it breaks down really nicely once it's in the swim. And 2, a fish has to work really hard to get a meal from a fine mix. Obviously you imagine if there's lumps there, it only has to pick up 1 or 2 lumps and it's satisfied. With a very fine mix, it needs to stay in your swim longer, there's more chance of you hooking the fish. So there you go, nice fine mix. That's probably my starting bet for method feeder work when the water's still cold. Next up, micro pellets. Now these are just simple 2mm XL dynamite pellets, soaked up. One thing I will say is, you can alter the breakdown of these pellets when you wrap it around the feeder. Obviously by squeezing them on hard, you can create a mix that hardly ever breaks down, and if you just squeeze them on a little bit softer, they'll break down ever so fast. One thing I will do sometimes to alter the breakdown rate even further is add some dry pellets straight out the bag, either to ground bait or to the soaked pellets. By doing that, those dry pellets, once they're in the swim, want to take on water so fast, they push everything away from themselves and it breaks the mix down really fast, unbelievably fast. So if you ever want to increase the breakdown rate of your mix, just add some dry pellets straight out of the bag and it'll mean that your mix flattens out straight away once it's in the peg. What I like to do is, obviously we've got ground bait and we've got pellets. What I like to do is have a separate tub on my side tray, and that will be my mixing tub. So some days the fish want ground bait, some days they want pellets, but quite often they'll want a combination of the 2. And what I'll do is throughout the day I'll just try different combinations. So instead of doing one big batch at the start, ruining the whole lot, what I'll do is I'll just add a few pellets, handful of pellets, handful of ground bait, try it for a couple of chucks, and then I'll chuck that batch away, do the same thing again, maybe 2/3 pellets, third ground bait. And doing those sort of combinations, doing that sort of thing, it means that I'm not wasting loads of bait, it means I'm not ruining the swim, and I'm just testing the water constantly. So there you go, there's my bait choices for putting actually around the feeder. As with a lot of my fishing, I like to keep things really simple. So when I'm talking about hook bait options, I like to limit myself a little bit. So if I was using ground bait, my first tried and trusted hook bait would be a dead red maggot. Caught loads of fish over the years on dead red maggots, stands out really well against dark ground bait, actually works brilliantly as a target bait, nice and light, and it catches almost everything. It's a good way of searching your peg. If I was to cast out the ground bait method feeder with a dead red maggot on, my tip was constantly rattling all the time, I'd know then there's too many silverfish in the peg, it's time to start fishing pellets, bigger hook baits, probably hard pellets on the hook. So it gives me a reading of what's going on in the peg. But if I can, I like to start on a single red maggot, size 18 hook, ground bait around the feeder. Gives me a good insight into what's going on under the water. Next up, when I start using the micros around the feeder, what I like to do is just use a standard 4 or 6mm hard pellet. Again, this is an XL pellet, matches the feed pellets perfectly. And what I think works in my favour a little bit is when those fish are a little bit wary, obviously the size difference between the hook bait and the feed bait means that there's a target there for the fish. The next tip I can give you is to think about your feeder size. Think about what you're actually casting out and presenting to the fish. Obviously, when the water temperature is still cold, the fish aren't going to want a huge method feeder bashed on top of their heads. The noise is going to put them off, the huge amount of bait is going to put them off. You've got to remember, we're not fishing for large shoals of fish that want a huge amount of bait to hold them in the peg. All we're looking to do is just pick 1 or 2 fish off at a time. So, rather than using a huge feeder like this Guru one, that I'd probably use in the summertime, all I'm going to do is, sort of for most of my springtime method feeder work, revolves around this Preston feeder. Little tiny Preston feeder, smallest one available. holds bait brilliantly, casts like a dream, makes a tiny little plop when it goes into the water. And importantly, as I say, you can alter the amount of bait, so you can just put a minimum amount of bait around the feeder. What I'm going to do is just fill these feeders up, I'll plop them in some water, and you'll see the difference between the amount of bait that each feeder holds. And when you think about a fish coming into the swim, each fish might only have 1 or 2 mouthfuls of bait. If he has 1 or 2 mouthfuls from the guru feeder, he's probably missing your hook bait. He's going to need to actually aggressively feed to actually pick up your hook bait. But if he only has 1 or 2 mouthfuls from the Preston feeder, that's probably 80–90% of the bait gone. He's bound to have picked up your hook bait and you'll hook him. So there you go. Think about your method feeder choice. Think about its weight. Think about its bait holding capacity. So let's talk about hooks and line. Now obviously the water's still cold, we need to think about scaling things down. Now for me, springtime method feeder work means small hooks. I'm only using 4 and 6mm hard pellets or single or double maggot on the hook, so I don't need massive hooks. I like to use a size 18 matrix hair rigger. It's a really strong sharp hook and it sits really nicely on the hook length because of the outturned eye. Line diameter wise, I'm fishing 012 today. Might be a little bit too light for a lot of people. To be fair, for me, I like to fish 014 if I can, but I will drop down to 012. My hook lengths are tied up to 4 inch, and quite often what I'll do, especially if I think that the fish aren't moving very far when they pick up the bait, is shorten that right down to a 2 inch hook length. Now, a 2 inch hook length works really well for fish like F1s. Fish that pick up a bait don't move very far between picking up the next bit of bait. So an F1 will just peck, gently feed on the method around the method feeder, and if that was a 4 inch hook length, it'd have to move a long way, 4 inch in fact, before the bolt rig of the method feeder came into play. So short 2 inch hook length works really well. So there you go, fine lines, small hooks, catch you loads more fish when the water's cold. The final tip, and probably the most important, is fish location. I'm faced today with the ideal situation. I've got an island swim to chuck at, so it's a natural fish holding spot and it's a reasonable depth up against the island. Me personally, I think on a day like today, still pretty cold, we're looking at finding 1.5 foot, 2 foot of water up against the island, and that is the ideal depth for fish to feed confidently in. Now, it's only a short chuck today. Something that I will finish on is that short rods are really important. Perfect for casting short range distances. I remember years ago we used to use 11 footers for this sort of distance and it was totally wrong. And also for playing fish on those light hooks, these short rods are perfect.